Good afternoon and welcome to Navigating a New Code Base Tips and Tricks to Ease the Transition. Our guest speaker for today is Cecilia Martinez, software engineer. My name is Jennifer Ponder. I am located in Atlanta, Georgia. I am the Front End Track Leadership Fellow at Women Who Code. And today our guest is Cecilia Martinez. She is a software engineer and also a volunteer Women Who Code Front End Track evangelist. She is located in Atlanta, Georgia. She is a graduate of the Full Stack Software Engineering program at Georgia Tech. Before transitioning into tech, she worked in journalism and financial services and obtained a BA in public communications and also an MBA in marketing. She is a volunteer with Women Who Code Front End, of course, and out in Tech Atlanta. Her hobbies include music, writing, traveling, and spending time with her dog, Sunflower. For more information, you can visit www.ceciliacreates.com or you can find her on Twitter at Cecelia Creates. Now we want to move into our Women Who Code mission, which speaks to inspiring women to excel in technology careers. Also, our vision speaks to a world where women are represented as technical executives, founders, VCs, board members, and software engineers. Please take a look at our code of conduct. We do want to make sure that we do have an inclusive and collaborative environment. If this is something that you're not seeing and there's something you want to let us know about, definitely send an email over to us at frontend at Women Who Code. Also, you can take a look at our full code of conduct at womenwhocode.com/code of conduct. Now we want to get into some of the Women Who Code front end information. If you're new or you'd like to become a member, you can register for events and also become a member at www.womenwhocode.com/front-end. We're always putting events up on our page. We're always really wanting to encourage new members to join the track community if you're interested. Also email us frontend at womenwhocode.com if you have any webinar ideas and you'd like to collaborate with us, any type of ideas that you'd like to see coming for the front end Slack study group, definitely email us. Also, we are on social media. You can find us on Twitter at WWCodeFrontEnd, also Instagram at WWCodeFrontEnd1, and we do have Slack available. We do have those Slack links around. You can check our Instagram. We do have the link in our bio. Also, we do put the link out from time to time on our Twitter, and we are working on getting that as a pinned tweet so you can find that easily. And also you can always send us an email at frontend at Women Who Code if you're interested, and we can add you to Slack that way. And without further ado, we're going to turn it over to our guest speaker today, Cecilia Martinez.
Hello, Cecilia Martinez here. Can everyone hear me okay? Sounds good, Jennifer?
We can hear you, definitely.
Okay, perfect. So I'll go ahead and get my screen shared here. And just want to confirm that the slides are showing.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so as Jennifer stated in her wonderful introduction, I'm Cecilia Martinez. I'm a software engineer in Atlanta, Georgia. And you can always find me or message me or tweet at me at Cecelia Creates. I'm pretty active on there. And I also have a website, ceciliacreates.com. So just a little bit about me. Like I said, Jennifer already gave a great introduction, but I'm a support engineer, junior developer, graduate of the Georgia Tech Full Stack Bootcamp, have a BA in public communications and MBA in marketing. Before software development, I worked in journalism and then financial services. I get bored easily. Case in point, my career trajectory up to this point. I'm a volunteer. I first learned HTML and CSS in high school to update my LiveJournal profile and make it look super cool. And I have a super cute dog named Sunflower who I'm obsessed with. You'll see pictures of her on Twitter. And this is proof that she is, in fact, adorable. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about the difference that I experienced going from my boot camp in kind of school world into my first full-time developer position in the real world. So I wanted to talk about the stack comparison. So in my boot camp, I learned GitHub, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, Node, specifically Express in the back end to build servers, MySQL, and using an ORM called SQLize to make queries into the database. We did solo projects and worked in small groups, and we deployed with GitHub Pages or Heroku. And then we also used the GitHub projects, Kanban boards, and issues in order to coordinate. So my job has had some overlap. I definitely was working with HTML, working with GitHub, which is great. We did use SAS, we do use SAS at my job, so that was something a little bit that I hadn't learned yet, and that's a pre-compiler for CSS. For the front end, it's using AngularJS instead of React. It's still a JavaScript framework, but it uses the MVC model, which is the model, view, and controller. And the reason that they use AngularJS is because it's more similar to C# and .NET MVC, which is what the majority of the app is built on and all the APIs. SQL Server instead of MySQL, but at least it is a SQL relational language, but they use an ORM called Entity Framework. And we're a distributed team, so I do work remotely from home. We have an office in Atlanta, but nobody actually uses it, so that was a bit of a challenge to get used to. We use IIS in order to deploy our website, AWS, enterprise project management software, CMSs, support systems. So as you can see, mobile app development, but these things are not equal. It was a great deal of learning curve going from my boot camp to my job, and it was something that I kind of took on voluntarily because I knew I was going to have to learn a lot and I was ready for the challenge. So, this was me going off to my first day to my at-home office. I had a really cool mouse pad and I thought I was hip and ready to go. And I started taking a look at the code base, and, it was impressive. It's a fully functional app with web app, mobile, tablet. It has a real database. It was functioning. But as I started to kind of dive into the code base more and take a look at it, there were some things I wasn't expecting. There was pathways that appeared only sometimes, and not every method always worked exactly the way that I would expect it to. The documentation, if it existed, only certain people had it, or it was a little bit tricky to read. And don't even get me started on the tables in our database, because there are a lot of them. So I went from this, really excited, positive, optimistic, my first day, to something kind of more like this. Just I struggled a lot, especially in the first month of my new job. So there, I had a bit of a reality check. Tutorials exist in isolation and are straightforward. Very different the type of activities that you're doing when you're either self-taught or you're in a boot camp, or even in at a more formal computer science program. You have no control over the stack workflows or tools that you're using in your job. You have to learn what's given to you. You're also solving problems from scratch without instructions. This is a really big difference, especially since I do support work in my job. I'm a support technician, so I'm going in and I'm fixing and finding bugs and trying to determine what the issue is. So you're solving problems and you're not necessarily following a tutorial. You're not following anything that exists in reality. So you have to make that up from scratch, which is very different. And then a senior developer does not equal a teacher. So, and that's not to say that there aren't really great senior developers that are also great teachers. I definitely am very fortunate to have a few where I work, but they're not dedicated to that full time. They may not explain things the same way that you're used to learning. And also they have other things that they have to do and other priorities, and they may not have been a junior for a long time. So the things that you are confused about, they may not even see it that way. So there's definitely some challenges that I faced going from into my first new job here. And some of the challenges that I faced were making time to prioritize learning, something I really struggled with. My local environment setup. So the meme is, but it works on my machine. So for me, it didn't work on my machine for a very long time, just because I was the only person who had set it up in a while. I was the first hire in a while. So they didn't have any documentation for that. And for me, also on my end, not asking for help soon enough. I definitely spent a lot of time working on things that I thought I should just know. And it turns out that I never would have been able to figure it out on my own without asking for help. Also understanding deployment and third-party services. So again, when you're building an app on your own or in a small group or in school, you're not really relying on too many outside tools. They're typically kind of more isolated or internal. And so understanding how we deploy, understanding all the different things that are hooked up into our app was very complicated for me. Again, a lack of documentation. And this is something that you may experience no matter what size company you work at. For me, I'm working at a smaller company with a smaller development team. So everybody pretty much tends to know things on their own. But you can also work at large companies that have a lack of documentation. And that's just a challenge that you may encounter. Also for me, a lack of other juniors. So everybody else in the team is a senior with at least 10 years of experience. So not being able to have somebody else that I could relate to with the lack of knowledge that I had was a little bit difficult because, again, everybody else already knows everything and I'm the only one out. And that felt a little, was definitely a challenge for me. And then going from writing code to reading and understanding code. And again, this played a lot into trying to find bugs and figuring out where things were. In boot camp, it's about producing as much code as possible. So you're writing it from scratch and you have control over it. And instead, this was reading and understanding code. What are these methods doing? How is this connected? And it's a very different skill set that I hadn't really developed as much. And then also, just feeling anxious about wasting time and not feeling like I could ask for help from the community for a couple of different reasons, just because it was proprietary code and, not sure. When you're learning in public, it's very different than asking for help at a job, which I think, was very different for me going into this. So part of this webinar, aside from going over some of the different challenges that I did and kind of giving myself a reality check, was talking about the things that I learned from this experience. So I was able to identify some best practices based on what I went through and want to kind of share those with you and make sure that you also have these tools in your tool belt for when you get you're either at your first developer job or maybe you're changing companies and switching stacks and it's very different for you, or if are changing positions if you're going from, say, like product development into software development. These would all be applicable to you. So the first of those is learning your way. So there's this VARC results that you can do online. It's essentially a test of how you learn. So I'm a multimodal learner, which means that I'd like to have a variety of different materials to learn with, the least of which is listening. So if somebody is talking to me and explaining something to me, I definitely tend to need something either more visual or kinesthetic in order to learn. So what that means is I needed to, understand how I learned best, but also ask for resources that fit your learning style. So if all the documentation is written, but you really prefer videos or you really need to be able to work through something, make sure that you communicate that and then you ask for resources that fit your style. And if they don't exist, then try and make them your own. Also, schedule dedicated time blocks for learning. So for me, I had a hard time because I felt like if I wasn't being productive, I wasn't either creating code or clearing tickets out, then I wasn't really doing a good job. But part of the reason that I was hired was to learn and was to develop. And so scheduling dedicated time blocks for learning and putting them on my calendar kind of helped me change my mindset a little bit and realize that is productive time because it's making me a better developer. Additionally, leveraging the community and online resources for help. So I learned over time that even though I couldn't ask specific questions like, what does this method do? And why isn't it working the way that I think it should work? You can kind of find resources that are similar to that area that you're working in. So for me, it was looking more into Entity Framework and how that ORM accesses the database, and kind of just instead of asking specific questions, asking things more central to that topic, such as, how do you use this at your workplace, or what's your experience with this tool? And so there's still a way in order to kind of be able to ask for help and to continue learning, even though it's something that's part of a job and not part of a school or learning program. So once you understand how you learn, the next step is to start big. And what I mean by that is start by learning system architecture and structure. Understand how the code base fits together, get an idea of the big picture. So you can either review system diagrams if they exist, or if they don't, create them. So you want to understand, the front end, how it connects to the logic layer. If you're using something like an MVC or .NET project, you'll have you have your data access layer, you'll have your business logic layer, you'll have your views, and you'll have your controllers, and you want to see how those all fit together. If you're using something that's more component based, like say a React app, then you'll want to understand, what the components are, how they're drawn into the app, and whether or not they're conditionally rendered, for example, or whether you're connecting to a backend, or whether it's all being held on the client side. So you want to kind of, at least for me, like drawing out those pictures to understand was a huge help. You also want to collect documentation for all the software tools and apps used. One of the things that I did was I made a software development checklist where I listed all of the things that you had to install, like Node. I did all of our online apps that we connected to, like MailChimp. Basically everything that we possibly would need to install on your computer or sign up for in order to develop locally. And I created a checklist for that. We didn't have a wiki when I first started. Now we do. And I've been collecting all the documentation for that. And essentially just getting it all in one space so you don't have to constantly ask different people, how do I do this? How do I do that? And just even if you don't necessarily understand all of it at first, collecting it in one place can be really helpful for you. So after you start big, you want to go small. And what I mean by that is, start with little pieces of code, things like bug fixes, writing and running unit tests to identify key mechanisms in your app. You want to examine small blocks of codes like individual units, like methods, components, and layers. You can do things like simple refactors, like deleting excess code or comments in order to understand how the process of committing code works. Then you can observe obsessively. And what I mean by that is take a look at everything that could possibly provide context to what you're reading. So things like pull requests, code comments, release notes. You can ask to shadow or pair with other programmers. And this is a big one actually, is use the app. Or use your product if it's not an app, and use it a lot. You want to almost be a super user so you can really understand every aspect of what the user goes through and how that relates to the code. So the app that I'm working on, wouldn't necessarily use it myself very often, but as a support technician, I really had to understand if somebody says, hey, this view or this page in the app isn't working, being able to identify, okay, where is that? What could be causing that problem was really important. And then, you can utilize breakpoints to see the logical flow. This is something that really most people use for debugging, but it's something that you can do proactively in the beginning while you're learning. And then also read product and user guides, any kind of marketing materials. If it's something, if there's any kind of training guides that maybe the users would refer to, you want to make sure that you're reading those. And then finally, document aggressively. So again, this goes back to collecting all the documentation. So you do want to keep a daily engineer notebook. This is something that I recently threw out on Twitter, asking people for what types of software and tools that they use for their engineer notebook. So that link there, bit.ly/engineer notebook, is a link to that Twitter thread with some definite recommendations. Based on this list, I actually ended up switching to something called Notion for mine. And what it is essentially, it's a really great tool, has a lot of different features and templates, but I essentially started doing this when I was in boot camp, and I keep a daily notebook of what I worked on that day, any kind of, tips and tricks and gotchas that may have come up. And that way I can also refer back to it as I'm learning. You want to submit any bugs or product improvements as you find them. Bonus points if you can fix them. So as you're going through becoming a super user of your product, if any kind of weird UI hiccups or any kind of thing that's buggy, you want to make sure that you document and submit those so they don't get lost. Fill in any gaps in existing documents or knowledge base. Keep track of accomplishments and highlights. So that's kind of something else that the daily engineer notebook does. And a big tool for me was in helping fight imposter syndrome, especially as I was spending a lot of time learning. I could refer back to my notebook and say, oh, you know what? I took a lot of notes that day. I learned a lot about, about this one particular topic. I did good. And it kind of just reminded me along the way that I was being productive, even if I didn't necessarily see that in other metrics. And then you want to build bridges between islands of knowledge. And what I mean by that is, if there's one person who always works on this certain section of the product, and that's really the person that knows everything, but that documentation doesn't exist anywhere else, you want to be the person to kind of combine all that knowledge and put it in one place. So for me, that was the wiki, getting that together. But understanding that different code bases and identifying who the different resources are for different areas of the code base and documenting that if it doesn't exist is going to be really helpful and also demonstrate your value as a junior. And then also test regularly. So this is something actually that Twitter recommended. We don't have a testing framework where I'm at right now, so it's something I didn't particularly think of, but it's a really great idea. So read existing tests and write new ones. Feel free to use your own testing platform as you learn. So if you're really comfortable with an existing testing platform that the company doesn't use, feel free to use that to write your own, unit tests in the meantime as you're developing before switching them over to the new platform. And then support a culture of automated testing if it doesn't currently exist. So a lot of best practices there, a lot of different things to take away. One of the most important ones, though, that I want to point out is that sometimes you just need to breathe. So for me, like I said, I had a really hard time in the first month of my job, dealt a lot with anxiety and imposter syndrome. I particularly remember one conversation I had with my partner where I said, I shouldn't have taken this job. This was a mistake. I blew it. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to lose this job and I'm not going to be able to come back from it. And now 2 months later, I'm so glad I didn't give up because I have learned so many things. I really feel like I'm adding value to my company, and pushing through that is really difficult. And so, it's okay that you don't get it. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to feel lost and like you've made a huge mistake. It's okay. Like I promise it's okay. Every other junior or every other software developer has at some point felt this way, and I promise you will get through it. So there's a couple of things that you can do in advance before you're in the position that I was in to better prepare yourself to learn a new code base. And some of that is to read as much code as possible. So like I said, I was so used to writing code and producing it, and reading it and understanding it is a totally different skill set. So if you're not currently doing that, take some time each day to or not necessarily each day, but set aside time to look at existing repos. Maybe go back and read some of your old projects and see what you did and how you would fix it if you could do it differently. Take a look at some open source projects and commit to them if you can, but just really taking a look at the file structure, reading through it, seeing why they set it up that way, understanding how it works together. And then start your engineering notebook now. If you're a student or you don't have a position yet, or if you're looking to get your first position, definitely get in the habit. It will only help you. And it's a great process to get started as soon as you can. Learn what tools companies use. So this is something where if there's a particular company that you're interviewing at or you're interested in, see if you can talk to somebody who already works there, find out what tools that they use. If there's something that comes up a lot, for example, GitHub, or if you tend to interview at a lot of companies that are using HubSpot or Zendesk, understanding how those integrations work with the code base can be really helpful and add some value to you as you're getting prepared. And then also find a mentor. Find somebody that you feel comfortable talking about the code base with, especially if you're the only junior, or if you're in a distributed team and you don't necessarily have access to somebody else that you feel you can talk to within your company. There's a lot of great resources online and in local communities that can help you with that. And speaking of resources, so this is, so like I said, there's a lot of great support communities. There's obviously Women Who Code, Women Who Code Atlanta, and then also Women Who Code Front End have been very, very helpful for me. So just a little bit of backstory too. I moved to Atlanta about 2 years ago. Don't have any family here. So Women Who Code Atlanta and all of the different meetup groups in the area were extremely helpful for me as I was going through my boot camp and making this career transition. I went to a lot of local meetups, like Code for Atlanta and Free Code Camp, some people from there. And everyone has always been very supportive along the way, and that's made a huge difference. Also, social media. Like I said, I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's not for everyone. I totally get that. But for me, it's been really helpful to see the experience of other junior developers and learn from them and throw out questions and get ideas. There's also a really great article here, freecodecamp.org/news/my first year as a software engineer. And there's a lot of these out there. So, dev.to and freecodecamp.org, if you can kind of search for, my first year as a developer or what I learned as a junior, a lot of those things can be really helpful in general. And then here's the link also to the VARC questionnaire. So that's how you can determine your learning style, whether you're auditory, kinesthetic, visual, or if you're like me, multimodal, and you need a variety of different types of resources to learn. So that is the end of my presentation. And I'm happy to take any questions or respond to any comments that anybody has.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for that amazing and great talk. Thank you for all of those great tips. Yes, we're going to open the floor up now for some questions. So feel free to put them in the chat. And also, we do have a Q&A section here if you can think of anything. Also, too, after the Q&A, I'm going to go over some closing remarks. Also, too, and also a special thank you to our sponsor for today. So we're just going to have a few minutes for questions here. And also, we always have our Slack, and you can always email us as well. If you have some things that you may think of later or a question for Cecilia, she's always very active in our Slack channel. And also, you can always send your questions to frontend@womenwhocode.com. So if there's anything that you think of that you don't think of right away. Okay, so we have a question from Michelle Strump. What are your thoughts about the way in which you should approach senior developers when asking a question?
So this is a great question. Thank you so much for asking. So we talked a bit in our boot camp about how do you ask a good question? And the reason that we talked about this is because if you're posting on Stack Overflow, for example, you don't want to just say, this isn't working, I don't understand. You want to kind of do your research and have very pointed question when you go to them. So say you've been working on an issue, you don't understand it, you tried a couple different things, you don't want to waste too much time, so you do want to reach out to a senior. I would recommend having a very specific format for your questions. And essentially it's, this is what's wrong, or this is what's not working. This is what I've tried. This is what I think it might be. So that's kind of a good format because it demonstrates what you've already tried, so they won't suggest things that you've already worked on. And it also demonstrates that you did, put some effort into it before you just asked a question. And then having a very specific of, this is what I think it might be, or this is what I've tried so far. Like, what would you recommend? Because you don't necessarily want to always be going to them with really general open questions. So for me, I started with, this isn't working. And then it was, well, did you try this? Did you try this? Did you try this? Did you try this? And, I hadn't, because I had no idea where to even start. So in some cases it's, that's how it's going to be. But I would definitely recommend also reaching out to them in a way that is consistent with your policies. So for me, because we're a small team and we're distributed, my manager was like, you have kind of one dedicated buddy that you can reach out to first. And if they're not available, or if it's something that they don't have as much knowledge about, then you can round robin to the other people. And I typically will send a Slack message and say something like, no rush on this. If it's not time sensitive, I'll say, hey, no rush. I'm trying to get, my local system set up and I'm getting this error. I've tried this, this, and this. Any ideas what this could be? And so send it out and, wait for feedback. If it's something that is time sensitive, though, obviously I will indicate that. But in general, I try to let them know, hey, I could use some help. This isn't time sensitive, so don't feel free like you have to rush back so far. This is what I've done so far, and this is what I need. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, and we're moving into our next question here from Eddie DeWitt. May I see your first slide again showing bootcamp versus on-the-job learning? Thanks. I'd like to take a screenshot if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me, let's see. Let me get back here. I think that was the second slide. There's probably a more efficient way to do this. I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so like I said, and this was kind of a self-inflicted situation that I got myself into, because I did have another job offer for something that was more in line with the stack that I learned at bootcamp. It was all HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery. And however, for a couple different reasons, number one, the product on this that I'm working on now is a lot cooler. Like, I just think it's a really neat product with some neat technology. I'm working remotely. And then also I was really interested in learning more skills and augmenting what I had learned in bootcamp, just because I'm still kind of figuring out what area I'd like to focus on or what stack I'd like to focus on. So and that's dependent on each person. But I think as a developer, you're always going to be learning new things, right? They're always going to introduce some tool. It's never a learn it and forget it type of position. So having the skills to be able to pivot and be able to, digest new information is going to be helpful regardless of what type of position you end up taking. And then I will be sending these slides out as well. I'll be posting them on Twitter, and I'll also be posting them in the WWCode Slack. So if you have any questions, please feel free to refer to those.
All right, and our next question comes from Alwina, and hopefully I don't mispronounce your name, but it's Olya Turner. Alwina wants to know, is it possible to share the slides or at least the links by email for future reference? And we just went over that. Cecilia's going to put those in the Women Who Code front end Slack channel and share on her Twitter. Janet Mendez has a question here. As a recent bootcamp graduate, what do you think is a good approach to finding a mentor in the field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if your company doesn't, or if typically like there's very formal mentorship programs that you can look for. Sometimes your local like Women Who Code chapter, or if there's a different type of meetup, will have opportunities or databases where people can sign up to mentor and sign up to mentee. If that can be, it's a little bit different. I prefer a more informal mentor-mentee relationship, but it's a little bit more difficult to find that if you aren't naturally outgoing or social. I'm a very social person, so I tend to go to a lot of meetups and am very comfortable walking up to strangers and starting talking to them. So if that doesn't work for you, then there's definitely resources that you can leverage. If you do a boot camp, or if you do a traditional college program, there's typically networks that you can leverage there. But otherwise, I would definitely, if you look into Women Who Code or a different type of group, there's all, depending on what type of position that you're in, if there's like a C# code or JavaScript meetup or something of that nature, you can also just throw it out there. Hey, this is my skill level. I'm looking for a mentor specifically with this. Is anybody interested? And just kind of, offer, go out for some coffee, or just keep it online, whatever is most comfortable for you. But, you may have to push outside of your comfort zone. That's kind of the realism of it, is that if you want these resources, sometimes you will have to kind of take that first step and reach out to somebody to find a mentor.
Okay, and our next question comes from Danielle Bargett. Can you share more about your process for finding a job? What worked and what didn't?
Okay, yeah, so this would probably be its own webinar, totally. But I was very aggressive with my job search. Like I just said, I'm very comfortable with networking, so that was a big part of my strategy throughout my boot camp. Essentially, I did a full-time boot camp, so I committed to it. It was 3 months, but before then I had spent some time working on it. And I needed to have a job once I graduated. Like most people, I need a job to live. So, but yeah, so I was, as a junior, I kind of understood that it would be more difficult than if I were coming in with a lot of experience. My personal strategy, because I was coming from a different type of industry and I already had a bachelor's degree and an MBA, was leveraging any kind of crossover skills as much as possible. So for me, I knew project management. I understood, like business relationships and how that worked. I have a communications background, so I'm able to, so documentation for me is something that I really enjoy because I used to write as a journalist. And so finding the skills that overlapped as a career switcher was very important. And then meeting as many decision makers as possible, either online or in person, was also really important because, unfortunately, there's a, even though the Atlanta in particular is very, very, there's a high demand, is also quite a bit of people in my exact position who have either switched careers and done a boot camp and are, looking for their first junior role. And they always say the first one's the hardest. And I definitely think that's true, but it's something that you really have to have a strategy for, a plan for, and dedicate time to it.
Okay, and our next question we have from Addie DeWitt. We have another question from Addie. I feel learning on the job is best for context. Did you find it so?
Yes. So there were so many things that like I said, I would never have been able to learn on my own, either before I got my job or even at my job, without asking for help or without just doing it. So that was one of the biggest struggles, is that it took so long to get my local environment set up that I didn't have a playground, so to speak, in order to work with the code for a long time. And that is something that's really important. So the sooner you can get a development environment set up, and the sooner you can just practice running through code and making changes and seeing how it goes, that is huge, because it's true. Learning on the job really is such a huge benefit versus trying to just read and digest or in other ways. So that's a really great point, Addie. Thank you.
Okay, and we have another question from Addie. Give me just a second. Were there any whiteboard interviewing to find your job? You know, did you go through any whiteboard interview for your current
Yeah,
position?
so I did have to do one whiteboard interview. It wasn't for this job that I ended up getting. Some of the other types of things that I had to do, though, were take-home projects. Basically, at one interview, they had me fix a web page live to match up a mock-up of what it should mix. So basically fixing the HTML and CSS and things like that. I did do one whiteboard interview where they kind of just asked me general things like, how would you write like a click handle for a button, and kind of had to draw that out a little bit. But the interview process for the job that I ended up getting, I actually talked about it a little bit on Twitter recently, and I was very lucky. But essentially, I presented one of my bootcamp projects, talked about it with the entire team on video chat. And they asked me questions about what decisions I made, how I would improve it and things of that nature, because this really is a junior position that I got hired for, and it was intended to be a learning position. So essentially, I think they were just trying to gauge kind of my curiosity, my ability to learn, my ability to and so it improve and things of that nature. So I have whiteboarding, but I also was a little bit more picky than I maybe should have been in my job search, because I tried to really look for something where I thought I could use the most of my existing background and not have to necessarily put myself through like the 6 months and 3 interviews and 2 projects and everything that a lot of juniors have to go through. But, like I said, I already have a bachelor's degree in MBA, so I'm coming into it from a very different perspective than most people. And I realize that that's a privilege. And so different people's experience may vary.
Okay, and we have some comments. I just want to read some comments that we have to you, Cecilia. The first one's coming from April May, and April, hope I'm not pronouncing your name incorrectly here. Constantinides. I'm new in my position at a dream company, and this talk reflects so many feelings I'm having. Thank you.
Oh, great.
And Maria Jose Hernandez. Thanks, Cecilia. Very insightful. Any advice on how to fight the fear of starting something new, like a side project, not like following a tutorial to get better at work for a newbie with imposter syndrome? I think that was
Yeah. So great question, Maria. And this is something, so like I said, I definitely struggle with imposter syndrome quite a bit, especially when I first started. And I have a couple of different ways that I found, and actually, I think his name is Jason Langstroth. It's very similar. I'll find it on something like that. I can never pronounce it, but I'll find the tweet and I'll send that out. But he did a book essentially about, it's a free ebook about how to kind of make yourself more productive and overcome some of the anxiety. And it's a lot of things that we've heard before, but just kind of, it helps you put them into practice in small bits at a time. But, it's a couple different strategies, like they say, attacking the frog first. So like, doing the hardest thing first part of the day and getting it over with. If that's something that doesn't work for you, breaking things up into small pieces and starting with the things that to kind of give yourself a couple wins to boost your confidence first. So sometimes, like, if I'm starting a new project and I know that the back end is going to be a nightmare for me, for example, let's just say, like, I know that it's going to be hard, but I know that I can make the file structure, and I know that I can create the issues in GitHub, and I know that, I can make up all the files. So I just start with that, and I start with something small, and then I feel like, okay, I accomplished something. That's great. And it gives me a little bit of confidence to keep going and work on it. But the biggest thing for imposter syndrome for me was having a support network, having people who remind me, like, no, you can do this. Like, look how far you've come. All the people in my boot camp, we were very supportive of, and we, have stayed friends afterwards. I have a lot of support with my friends and my family and social media. And so having people who are going to be your cheerleaders and your champion is really critical, I think, as well. If it's tough for you to find that within yourself, I very, very much envy and admire people who are able to just kind of get over the hump themselves. But if you need external validation too, that's okay. So yeah, I hope that that's helpful.
Okay, so I think that's all of our questions. Were there any more questions we had today? Just want to check on that for another second or two here. As I stated before, you can also put your questions. If there's anything come up, we had some great information here that Cecilia shared with us today. Anything comes up, you can place that into our Slack channel, and also, of course, email us, front-end@WomenWhoCode again. Hi, was that T-May Darden, how to get into our Slack. Actually, I can send you out a Slack invitation. Just send your name and your email address over to front-end@WomenWhoCode. I can send you a Slack invitation. And also, again, our Slack, we do have a link in our Instagram page at WWFrontEnd1. Also as well, but I can definitely send you out a Slack invitation. Just send over your name and your preferred email address to frontend@womenwhocode.com, and I'll send that out to you. And Michelle Strong says, thank you both. Thank you, Michelle, for participating today and being an attendee. Now I'm just going to go over some of our last minute announcements that are coming forward. Just a moment here. Okay, so new events coming to Front End. Of course, you know, every week we do our Front End Friday Slack study group. That happens every Friday in our Front End Friday channel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We cover topics. We just got done doing open source. This month, we want to take an approach, and I know, Cecilia, you're pretty much our host, you, Favor, and also Elizabeth Moran, so we'll be switching hosts from time to time. Cecilia, would you like to go over any new topics that you're going over in Slack study group, or anything that you'd like to share that you all may touch on this week?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are actually going to be, November, we had put a poll out for accessibility versus serverless, and they were neck and neck. And I think we're actually going to be going with serverless this month, been talking about accessibility in December. But for those of you that aren't familiar, I think that serverless is a really popular front-end topic right now. Essentially, serverless actually means server as a service, but it's using there's different tool chains that you can use. GraphQL is one of the most popular ones, but we're going to be diving into what that means for front end and how it can essentially help you create more robust applications and connect to a database and connect to a server without having to have those backend skills. So I'm pretty excited to dive into that with y'all, because it's something I'll be learning myself as well along the way.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for that. And moving into the next thing, I know, like you said, serverless and accessibility, it's neck and neck. All of that is really popular right now. Something that I wanted to do for the month of November is just go over some accessibility tips this month, because we do want to keep in mind that we want the web to be helpful to everyone and everyone to have access. So we're going to be sharing some pros tips and some other helpful resources this month for accessibility when you're developing applications and things to take into consideration. Our next track event, Have You Met TypeScript? That's going to be happening November 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Our guest speaker is going to be Sanjita Norris. She's out of our Women Who Code Atlanta local group, so please be sure to register for that. You can check out our events page. Also, go to www.womenwhocode.frontend/events. And also, our next conference that is coming up is Connect NYC. This is going to be our developer conference coming up December 7th in New York. We just finished up our Data Pi conference here in Atlanta at Honeywell this past weekend. So if you were able to come out, thank you so much for your participation and coming out. And also want to say a special thank you to our sponsors today, BCG Digital Ventures and also the Home Depot. And thank you all for watching this presentation. Again, we will have the recording up as soon as it is done processing. But again, reach out to us at front-end@women-who-code. And also, if you'd like to join our Slack channel, I will be sending Slack invitations out. Just send your name and your email address to front-end@women-who-code, and we will see you online.